Black Hollow was the kind of town that didn't appear on most maps. Nestled deep in the folds of the Grapevine Mountains, it was a place where the trees whispered old secrets and fog rolled in like smoke from forgotten fires. Life moved slowly in Black Hollow until the day the hunters dragged the mountain man into town. Bound and broken, they found him north of the ridge near the collapsed mine, what used to be Liviard's Pass. Before the landslide sealed it decades ago, he had no shoes, no weapon, and no words. But he stood over 7 feet tall, his skin weathered like bark, and his eyes were hollow and wild, like something that had never seen firelight. The hunters, a trio of hardened men with more scars than teeth, said they found him crouched over a carcass, blood on his hands. That was all the town needed. They didn't kill him. That might have been too merciful or too dangerous. Instead, they built a cage of iron and pine, bolted to the cobbled square. A dozen padlocks sealed it shut. He was left there like some dark monument, shirtless, caked in dried mud and scabs. Arms like tree limbs, hair matted into thick ropes. They called him the Beast of Black Hollow. Children weren't allowed near the cage, but they came anyway, peering between the bars like he was an animal in a traveling circus. Some dared each, other to toss stones, run close, or spit. He never flinched, never growled, never blinked. The bravest boys claimed he growled at night, but no one could prove it. He's not right in the head, old Marna muttered to anyone who'd listen, rocking in her porch chair with a shotgun across her knees. Saw it in his eyes. Ain't no soul in there, just meat and rage. Pastor Greeley took to preaching louder, sweating through sermons about the end times and beasts among men. He is a warning, he'd bellow, fist shaking toward the town square. A curse upon our pride. Do not pity the monster. Pity yourselves if you forget what evil looks like. Few questioned it. In Black Hollow, silence bred truth. The only person who ever spoke to the man, if one could call it that, was Sheriff Bram. Every morning, Bram would approach the cage, coffee in one hand, rifle in the other. He'd squat beside the bars and look him over. "You eatin'?" He'd ask. No answer? "You sleepin'?" Nothing. "Still ain't speaking, huh?" The sheriff always gave it 5 minutes. Then he'd sigh, stand, and walk away. He wasn't cruel, not like the others, but he wasn't trying to help either. More like he was waiting for something, some sign the beast was more than just skin and scars. But weeks passed, then months, and the mountain man never moved, never spoke. Only his eyes shifted now and then, watching, always watching, but never reacting. Even in the worst storms, when thunder cracked over the rooftops and rain pooled beneath the cage, he sat still, hands on his knees, head bowed like a man in prayer. No one remembered exactly when they stopped seeing him as a man. Maybe it was the second week, when a butcher's boy claimed he'd seen the beast eating raw meat. Maybe it was the third, when Mrs. Felder swore he howled at the moon. Maybe it was just easier. People feared what they couldn't understand, and they feared him deeply. So life went on in Black Hollow, with the beast in his cage, always there, always silent. He became part of the square, like the old stone well, or the rusted statue of the founder. Tourists from neighboring villages came to look, to point, to take blurry photos. The hunters even started charging for close-up viewings, 5 coins to walk the rope line, 10 if you wanted to throw a bone into the cage. And the mountain man? He said nothing, did nothing, until the day a black carriage rolled into town. Until the widow stepped out, until she walked straight to the cage and didn't look away. Asterisk, she arrived on a gray morning, when the mist hung low and the sun barely broke through the clouds. A black carriage rolled up the southern road, wheels crunching gravel, drawn by 2 lean horses with the weariness of a long journey. It came to a stop outside Greeley's chapel, Where the preacher had just begun ringing the morning bell, no one recognized the coachman, and the carriage bore no crest. But when the door opened and Clara Whitlow stepped down, every pair of eyes in the square took notice. She was tall for a woman, wrapped in a black traveling cloak, her gloved hands clutching a silver-headed cane. A mourning veil covered her face, but her movements were purposeful, quiet, controlled. She walked as though she'd walked through fire before and come out untouched. People whispered. "Widow Whitlow," they said. "The banker's daughter who married the soldier. Moved away after the war. Word was her husband died in some mountain battle a decade back." She hadn't returned to Black Hollow since, not until now. She didn't speak to anyone as she stepped down Main Street. Her boots tapped steadily on the cobblestones. Her head didn't turn toward the baker's window, or the blacksmith's forge, or the market stalls. She walked with only one destination in mind. She stopped in front of the cage. The town fell. Quiet. The wind stopped. Even the birds seemed to hush. Clara stood just outside the rope line, her posture straight as a blade. She didn't flinch, didn't recoil, didn't gasp like most first-time onlookers did. She simply looked inside the cage. The mountain man sat as he always did, cross-legged, still, eyes downcast beneath a curtain of hair. The iron bars cast long shadows across his bare chest. The townsfolk held their breath, expecting him to ignore her like he ignored everyone else. But slowly, his head lifted, his gaze met hers. Something flickered in his expression, just a glint, a shimmer, a moment. Confusion? Recognition? It was gone before anyone could be sure. But Clara didn't blink. She stared back like she was reading scripture in his eyes. She took a step forward, crossing the rope line. Gasps rippled through the gathering crowd. Pastor Greeley dropped his Bible. The butcher's boy whispered, "She's gonna get herself killed." Sheriff Bram, standing with one foot on the general store's porch, spat out his tobacco and stepped forward, hand on the grip of his revolver. "Ma'am," he said, voice low, "I'd kindly ask you stay behind the line." Clara didn't move. "Does he speak?" Bram frowned. "Not a word in 4 months. You ain't gonna be the one to change that. I'd like to try." "You'd like?" The sheriff rubbed his temple. "Lady, I don't know who you think. I think I know him," she said, "or knew him once." That silenced him. She turned her head slightly, lifting her veil just enough for him to see her eyes gray as slate, cold and clear. "Was he found near the old Leaviard Pass?" "That's where the hunters claim," Bram said cautiously. "You know something?" "I know someone who never came home from that pass." The silence deepened. She stepped back from the cage. Finally, just a pace as if finished with her inspection. Her voice dropped lower, just above a whisper. "I'll speak to the mayor before dusk," she said. "I want to make an offer." "Offer for what?" Bram asked, brows drawing in. Turned to face him fully. Then, slipping the glove from her left hand, she held up a single gold ring, dulled by time but still gleaming. "For him," she said. Gasps again. Murmurs. A few people laughed, nervous, unbelieving. "You want to buy the beast?" Someone scoffed. Clara's tone remained even. "He is no beast." And then she walked away, slow and certain, the gold ring flashing in the dim light, leaving behind only stunned silence and the faint, impossible image of the mountain man watching her go. The widow Whitlow wanted to buy the beast. Children were sent home early from school. Church ladies gathered in knots beneath eaves, whispering with hands over their mouths. The mayor choked on his soup when the sheriff relayed what she'd said. "Her wedding ring?" he sputtered. "What kind of twisted sentiment is that?" Sheriff Bram hadn't left the square since that morning. He stood with one boot planted on the edge of the cage platform, chewing the inside of his cheek, watching. The townsfolk buzzed like hornets. The mountain man hadn't moved since Clara walked away, but there was something different in his posture. Still silent, still distant, but not vacant. Not today. She talked to him again? Asked Gideon, the oldest of the 3 hunters who'd brought the man in. He leaned against a hitching post, face ruddy from drink. No. Bram said, Then what the hell'd she want with him? Gideon squinted toward the cage. You think maybe he's one of them runaway soldiers? Deserted? Hell, she's a war widow, ain't she? Maybe he killed her husband and she wants revenge. Bram didn't reply. The thought had crossed his mind, but it didn't fit. Clara Whitlow didn't look like a woman who'd waited a decade for blood. She looked like a woman chasing ghosts, inside town hall. The mayor paced furiously in front of the hearth while Clara stood, calm as ever, hands folded. We are not a town that sells people, Miss Whitlow, he snapped. Especially not ones. Like him, he's not a stray dog. He's dangerous. He's alone, Clara replied. He's a threat, the mayor shot back. And until we understand what he is, what he's done, we can't let him walk free. I didn't ask for him to be freed. That stopped him. No? I asked for him to be released into my custody. There's a difference. She drew the gold ring from her pocket and placed it carefully on the table between them. This is all I have left of Thomas. If I offer it, it's not done lightly. The mayor stared at the ring, then up at her. And what do you plan to do with him? Feed him soup and read him bedtime stories? You saw him. He's not right. I want to speak with him, care for him. See if what I suspect is true. The mayor leaned in. And what do you suspect? Clara's voice softened. That I once knew him, that he may have known my husband, and that if he is what I believe, he doesn't belong in a cage. By sunset, the entire town gathered in the square, half out of curiosity, half to protest. She's out of her mind. She's cursed, that one, or worse, enchanted by him. You seen her eyes? Like stone. Clara stepped into the square. Just as the mayor climbed onto the wooden platform beside the cage, Sheriff Bram stood to the side, arms folded. Gideon and the other hunters loomed near the crowd, hands on knives they didn't need. The mayor raised both hands. Folks, as you may have heard, the widow has come to us with an offer. She's requested custody of the man we've kept caged for 4 months. Boos and hisses erupted. She's offered a wedding ring in exchange, symbolic, sure, but also valuable. I've decided after much consideration that we will allow a trial period. She'll take responsibility for him. Feed him. Watch him. If he turns violent, she answers for it. If he escapes, she answers for that too. Madness. Someone yelled, Better than killing him? Another muttered. Clara approached the platform without hesitation. She stood in front of the cage and met the mountain man's gaze again. Do you remember me? She asked, softly. He blinked slowly. She reached into her pocket and held the ring between 2 fingers. The metal caught the dying light. My name is Clara Whitlow. My husband was Thomas. We both knew a man named Elias. The mountain man's breath hitched. His fingers curled slightly on his knee. Clara stepped closer, beyond the rope, beyond the warnings, and knelt beside the cage. I'm taking you home, she whispered. Clara's cottage sat on the eastern edge of Black Hollow, where the woods grew thick and the road narrowed into a forgotten trail. It had belonged to her parents, once long abandoned, but still standing. The townsfolk whispered that she'd gone back to it because no one else would take her in with him. But Clara didn't care. She preferred the quiet. The cage was gone. Now, the locks, the platform, the rope line all dismantled. The mayor insisted the man wear shackles on the journey to her home. Clara insisted they come off the moment he crossed her gate. She had agreed to full responsibility. She would not chain him like an animal under her roof. And so, the mountain man walked beside her, barefoot on the dirt path, wrists free. Clothes rough and worn but clean, courtesy of Sheriff Bram's wife, who had set a bundle of folded clothes on Clara's porch without a word. The man said nothing the entire way, but he watched her dot every time her hand brushed a branch aside, every time she adjusted the ring now hung from a chain around her neck. Every time she turned to check on him, his gaze was there, heavy and uncertain. Dot inside the cottage, she pointed to the cot by the fire. "That's yours," she said gently. "You'll be warm here. Safe." He didn't sit, didn't move. She sighed and stepped into the kitchen, returning with a chipped bowl of stew. She offered it to him, both hands out. Slowly, cautiously, he took it. His fingers brushed hers, rough, calloused, trembling just slightly. He sat. That night, she didn't sleep much. She stayed in her old bedroom, door ajar, listening for movement. But there was none. Just the steady breath of the man beside her. Hearth and the occasional crackle of flame. In the morning, she found him standing by the window, staring out toward the woods. "Do you remember your name?" she asked. He turned slightly, lips parting as if the word hovered there. But nothing came. "Elias," she said. "That was your name, Elias Ward." Something shifted in his eyes. She stepped closer, holding a folded scrap of paper, aged and stained. "This letter came from Thomas months before he died. He said you saved him once, dragged him off a battlefield, held off 3 men while he crawled for safety." She offered the paper. Elias stared at it, but didn't take it. Clara pressed on. "After that battle, he said you went missing. Vanished. Into the mountains. No one knew what happened to you. I thought you died up there." Finally, his voice came gravelly, hesitant, as if unused for years. "Not dead." Clara's breath caught. He swallowed. "Cold. Lost." She took a step forward. "You remember?" His eyes fell to the floor. "Not all? Pieces. Do you remember Thomas?" A long silence. Then, barely audible, "Yes." Clara sat across from him, tears welling but unshed. She had waited years for this moment, carried grief like a stone in her chest. It wasn't a full answer. It wasn't closure. But it was something. He was still in their by the week's end. The town buzzed with conflicting tales. The beast talking now. She's tamed him like a dog. He was never a beast. Just broken. They didn't know what to believe anymore. Sheriff Bram visited once to make sure she was safe. He stood awkwardly by the gate, watching Elias chop wood in the yard without prompting, muscles rippling under the morning sun. The man nodded once at Bram, didn't speak. But there was no wildness in him, only weariness. "He's remembering things," Clara told the sheriff. "You trust him?" Clara hesitated. Then, "I trust he was never what we feared." Bram nodded. "Sometimes the town gets it wrong. Sometimes?" she said, raising an eyebrow. He had the decency to look ashamed when he left. Elias returned to stacking the firewood, movement steady and methodical. Later that night, as the wind stirred the branches and a storm crept down from the mountains, Clara lit a candle, sat across from him, and asked softly, "Why did you never come back?" Elias stared into the flame. "I tried," he whispered, "but I forgot how." The storm broke just after midnight. Wind howled down the mountain slopes like the cries of something ancient and grieving. Trees bent, groaning. Rain came in sheets, drumming against the roof, lashing the windows. Thunder rolled over Black Hollow, deep and rumbling like a war drum in the sky. Inside the cottage, Clara lit lanterns and secured the shutters. It had been years since the storms reached this deep into the valley with such violence. A bad omen, some would say. Elias stood by the door, every muscle taut, eyes locked on the window like he expected the woods to come crashing in. "You don't need to be afraid," Clara said gently, placing a second log on the fire. His gaze flicked toward her, uncertain. I've lived through worse storms, she added. They pass. They always pass. Elias didn't answer, but he stepped away from the door. He hated the sound. She could see it in the way his jaw clenched with every thunderclap. The memories must have been loud inside him. Not the weather, but something else. Clara had read enough letters from war-torn men to recognize that hollow-eyed look. The way sound became a trigger, not a sense. She brought him a blanket. "Sit," she said softly. He hesitated but obeyed, kneeling near the hearth. She sat beside him on the rug, folding her legs under her skirt, close enough to feel his warmth but not touch him. "Do you remember the river?" she asked, trying to reach him through the storm. He didn't look at her, but she went on, behind. "The Whitlow estate, where the mountain water met the hollow. Thomas used to take me fishing there in spring. Said you taught him. He never caught a thing, but he always insisted I bring a basket anyway. You used to tease him for using the wrong line." Elias's lips twitched, barely, a flicker of a smile that never formed. "Your hands," she said, looking at them. "They're the same. I remember them. You used to carve little horses out of pine for the neighbors' boys when their father died." He flexed his fingers. They were scarred, calloused, knuckles swollen from old breaks, but human. Not monstrous. "I don't remember everything," he said, voice low, gravel scraping the edges. "That's all right," she said. "You don't have to." Silence stretched between them. But it wasn't the hard silence of the cage. This. One breathed. Finally, Elias spoke again. "They think I'm a beast. They're wrong." He nodded slowly. "I was gone. In the woods. Long time. Lost. No names. No people. Only cold. Hunger." She listened, letting him speak at his own pace. "Sometimes I heard voices. Thought maybe I was dead. Or dreaming. You weren't dreaming." "No," he whispered. "But I forgot what it meant to be a man. Forgot kindness." His voice caught on the word. Clara reached into her cloak and pulled the chain from around her neck. The wedding ring swayed at the end of it, catching the firelight. "Thomas would have brought you back if he could," she said. "He never gave up on you, even when the others did." Elias stared at the ring. He didn't reach for it, but the way he looked at it was reverent, as though it were the last star in a sky he'd long forgotten. Thunder cracked again. This time, he didn't flinch. The next morning, the air smelled clean. The storm had passed, leaving the woods soaked. And shimmering Clara found Elias already outside, sleeves rolled, chopping firewood with methodical precision. Every swing was steady, practiced. It wasn't just strength, it was control. He paused when he saw her, breath rising in clouds. Then he nodded, and for the first time she saw something close to peace behind his eyes. The town still talked. Of course. About the storm. About the widow. About the man who was no longer in a cage. But fewer spoke with scorn now. More with curiosity. Some with guilt. Clara knew it would take time, but trust was growing. One axe swing, one bowl of stew. One shared memory at a time. Asterisk the first time he said his name aloud. It came like a whisper from the bones. They were sitting on the porch, the early spring sun just breaking through the thinning clouds. Clara was peeling apples into a chipped bowl while Elias sat a few feet away, sharpening an old blade with slow, careful strokes. The birds had returned to the trees that week, and the cottage, once silent for so many years, had started to hum with life again. "I dreamed of the ridge last night," Elias murmured, not looking at her. Clara didn't stop. "Peeling. What did you see?" "Snow, cold, and a man shouting my name from the trees." He paused. "It was Thomas, younger, smiling. He used to call me Ward." "Just that." Clara looked up. "Elias Ward." He nodded slowly. "Yes, that was me." She set down the knife and bowl. You remembered. Only pieces, he said. But they're stronger now. More real. Clara smiled, not wide, not triumphant, but soft and grateful, like someone receiving a long-lost letter from a dead man's hand. That name still means something, she said. You didn't lose it, not really. It just waited for you. He studied her a long moment. Why did you come for me? She hesitated. That was the question she had been asking herself since the day she arrived in Black Hollow. The easy answer was grief. The honest one was harder. Because you were the last thread left, she said finally. When Thomas died, I wasn't just mourning him. I was mourning everything he carried. His past, his friends, his memories. You were one of them. I couldn't let you stay in that cage. Not when I suspected who you were. He looked down at the blade in his hand. I didn't know how much I'd forgotten. Now you're remembering. Elias set the blade down. When the war ended, I didn't come back. I tried to. I wandered down from the hills, but I couldn't find the road. I couldn't find my voice. Clara nodded, waiting. I survived too long on fear. It made me something else. His voice dropped. When they caught me, I didn't fight because I didn't remember I was a man. She reached over and gently touched his wrist. He didn't pull away. You are one now. That night, she left the door to the cottage open. Not out of carelessness, but as a gesture. A choice. He didn't have to stay. He was no longer caged, and she would not hold him. Even with kindness. In the morning, he was still there. The town noticed. Slowly. The muttering grew less sharp, the sideways glances more uncertain. One morning, old Marna herself, who once claimed he had no soul, left a jar of preserves on Clara's fence post, muttering about debt and decency before hobbling off. Sheriff Bram visited more frequently, always casual, but Clara could see the curiosity behind his eyes. Elias greeted him now with a nod and sometimes a word. Sheriff, he'd say, voice hoarse but steady. That was enough to stun the man the first time it happened. You planning to stay here? Bram asked one afternoon as Elias worked in the garden. Elias looked toward Clara, then back at the sheriff. If I'm welcome. Bram rubbed the back of his neck. You're not in the cage anymore. That counts for something. A week later, Bram brought Elias a coat, an old military one from the war, stitched at the cuffs but clean. Elias accepted it with a quiet thank you. He wore it when he went to the market for the first time. People stared, of course. But they didn't flee. Clara walked beside him the entire way. Her arm linked gently with his, the gold ring still glinting on the chain at her neck. The butcher handed Elias a wrapped bundle of meat without a word. The baker, after a long pause, offered a fresh roll. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet. But it was something. Recognition, perhaps. Or maybe just the first step toward remembering that a man could fall far and still rise again, even from a cage. The town had always been good at forgetting things. They forgot the winters when Clara's father gave firewood to every home on the East Ridge, even when he barely had enough to heat his own. They forgot the names of the soldiers who didn't return from the Grapevine conflict, except the ones whose families could afford to carve them in stone. And they forgot Elias Ward, before he ever had a chance to be remembered, before the cage, before the whispers, before the town turned its back on the man they once hailed a hero. Sheriff Bram had started digging through old records, not officially, of course, but curiosity gnawed at him. One evening, with the fire low and the station quiet, he dusted off the faded enlistment logs stored in the archives under the chapel. He found Elias Ward's name near the bottom of a torn manifest listed beside two others, Thomas Whitlow and a third soldier named Heron Bell. Bram frowned. Heron Bell. He remembered that name. Bell had returned from the war in pieces. Not his body, his mind. He'd lasted maybe 2 months back in Black Hollow before vanishing into the woods. They never found him. Some said wolves. Others whispered suicide. The mayor, years ago, had dismissed it all. Another casualty of grief, he'd said. Let the war bury the rest. But now Bram wasn't so sure. Too many questions hung in the air like fog. Clara and Elias sat by the fire that evening, her knitting, him slowly carving a length of wood into something that might become a bird. He worked with purpose now, not just to stay busy, but to create. His hands remembered things even when his mind did not. She noticed the change before he did, how he no longer jumped when the wind rattled the shutters, how his posture had relaxed, how he began humming under his breath when he worked. Healing didn't always arrive with ceremony. Sometimes it came with a cup of tea and silence, but healing also made room for pain. There was another. Elias said quietly, not looking up. Third man, with us, Thomas and me. Clara stilled. Herrenbell? He nodded. He died. But? Not there. Not in the fight. Tell me, she said gently. Elias's brow furrowed. We were trying to come home, 3 of us. After the ridge collapsed, we were cut off. No food. Cold. Weeks of walking in circles. Herren lost himself. Clara listened, hands resting in her lap. He kept talking to things that weren't there. Said the mountain was speaking to him. Said the snow was alive. We tried to help him, Thomas and I, but Elias paused. One night he vanished, left his boots behind. And Thomas? Elias stared at the fire. There was an avalanche. We'd finally found the pass. A way back. Thomas made me go ahead. Said he'd cover the rear. I heard him shout, then everything went white. He set the carving down. When I woke up, I was alone. Broken ribs. No path. Just snow. I called for him until my throat bled, but no answer. Clara reached for his hand. You tried to come back, she said. I tried, Elias whispered. But something in me cracked. Like ice breaking. Underweight. I stopped being me. I didn't even remember my name. You remember it now. He nodded, tears building in his eyes but not falling. Outside, the wind had settled. A full moon lit the clearing beyond the cottage, casting silver across the ground like a quiet blessing. The next morning, Sheriff Bram showed up on horseback, holding a folded paper in his hand. You need to see this, he told Clara. Thought you both might. Elias stepped outside, still wearing the old military coat. Bram handed him the record, page faded, but legible. Your name's on it, he said, with Thomas and Bell. Elias stared at it for a long time. Then he folded it gently and tucked it into the coat's inner pocket. You were one of us, Bram said after a pause. And we forgot. Elias looked him in the eye. You didn't forget. You chose not to remember. Bram took that like a blow. But he didn't argue. I'm sorry, the sheriff said quietly. Elias nodded once. That was enough. From that day on, the cage was never spoken of again, not in the square, not in the tavern, not even by the children. The platform where it once stood became a garden. Clara planted lavender there, and Elias built a bench beside it, carved with 3 names, Thomas Whitlow Herrenbell, Elias Ward, the names the town tried to forget, but the mountain remembered. Asterisk Winter had returned to Black Hollow, but it came softly this time, like a whisper instead of a roar. Snow blanketed the valley in quiet white, muffling the sounds of the town and the woods alike. The mountains stood tall and silent under the pale sun, their shadows long across the frozen fields. Clara stood by the window of her cottage, fingers tracing the chain that held the wedding ring she had once offered in exchange for Elias's freedom. The ring gleamed faintly in the fading light, a symbol of sacrifice, trust, and hope. It had bought more than a man. It had brought a future neither of them dared to imagine before. Elias was outside stacking firewood in neat piles. He moved. With calm certainty now, every gesture deliberate and grounded. No longer a beast trapped in a cage, he was a man reclaiming his place in the world. One steady step at a time. Clara opened the door and stepped outside, the cold biting but clean. Elias looked up and smiled, a rare warmth in his eyes that made her heart ache. "Winter is hard," she said quietly, pulling her shawl tighter around her shoulders. He nodded. "But it can be beautiful." They walked together to the garden where the bench stood beneath the bare branches of a young oak. The lavender had faded to gray under the frost, but the names were clear, carved deep, shining like a promise. Clara reached out and touched the name, Elias Ward. "Do you ever think about going back to the mountain?" she asked. He hesitated. "Sometimes. The mountains are part of me. They always will be. But I am not lost there anymore." She smiled. "You're home now." Elias's gaze drifted to the sky, where clouds curled like smoke. "I owe you more than I can say," Clara shook her head. "You owe yourself." The silence between them was comfortable, like the space after a long winter storm, calm, full of possibility. Suddenly, footsteps approached. Sheriff Bram, carrying a small parcel wrapped in brown paper. "I thought you might want to see this," he said, holding out the package. Inside was a bundle of letters, old and fragile. Correspondence between Thomas, Elias, and Heron, letters that had been lost to time but now returned. Clara's eyes misted. They never forgot each other. Elias carefully unfolded a letter, tracing the words with fingers that no longer trembled. "We will find our way," it read, "even if the road is buried beneath snow and silence." Clara looked at Elias, hope bright in her eyes. "Maybe," she said softly, "that's what you've been doing all along." The mountain man in the cage was gone. In his place stood a man who remembered his name, his past, and the love that had saved him. And in Black Hollow, the story changed from fear to forgiveness, from silence to song. Together they faced the coming spring.